Good morning. My name is Daniel. I'm the pastor here at Kindred Presbyterian Church. So glad we could be worshiping together and so grateful for what is now our second time worshiping together as a new church, as a church plant. So grateful for all the love and support that surrounded us both today and last week. I forgot to mention this from the pulpit, but I was so grateful to hear that even CPC, our partner church, they were praying for us in their service for our church and for our launch, and just so grateful for all the love and support. I am also grateful that today is our first kind of normal Sunday, right? 2 Sundays ago we had our commissioning service. Last Sunday was our launch service. I like a normal Sunday, you know what I mean? A normal Sunday is a good Sunday where we just simply worship the Lord together. We give him the praise he so deserves, and we hear from his word. And as we continue in our beginnings series through the book of Genesis, today we ask the question, where does work come from? Why does work exist? Is work just a necessary evil that we have to do for the sake of making money? Is our work supposed to be our identity? Or is it something else altogether? And what is the biblical understanding of work? What is the biblical understanding of rest? The book of Genesis certainly gives us some good insights on that. So let us turn there. Today we're going to look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 28 to chapter 2, verse 3. You could turn there in your Bibles. It's also going to be projected for you overhead. Genesis chapter 1, starting from verse 28. Let's give our attention and reverence, for this is the reading of God's word. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 6th day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. This is God's word. The passage that we just read, it says so much. It shows us so much. And of course, beyond, even in Genesis 2, it shows us so much about the foundations of work and rest from the very beginning. It's not an afterthought, right? Like our jobs, our work, everything we do. Once again, not only like your jobs that you go to the office for, but even the work you do in the household, in your homes. All the work we do has meaning, as we can see, because God established it from the very beginning. And the first thing we notice in this passage that should stand out to you is this. Even in paradise, right? We're reading the very beginning. This is before sin, before the fall, before anything bad ever happened on this earth. And we know a lot of bad things have happened since then. But even in paradise, God gives human beings a job to do. There is work to be done. And of course, before we even get to human beings having a job to do, we have to even recognize, even in paradise, first of all, God worked, right? He modeled the act of creation as a 6-day work week with 1 day off. And then he gives human beings work to do. This tells us that work is inherently a good thing. Work is part of creation before the fall. Work is part of paradise. Work is part of the Garden of Eden. And it is part of who we are. I asked the question at the very beginning, is work part of our identity? It is. It should be. People will tell you that's why, this applies more to Western names. I don't think it really applies to Asian family names. But like that's why we have last names like Fisher or Baker, right? Like it was literally their identity, and that was their job, at least, many, many generations ago. Yeah, Kim, I don't think there's really a work involved there, but it certainly applies to Western names, to their identity. Another important thing to notice in verse 28 here is how does this passage start? How does it start? Before we're given a job to do, it says, and God blessed them. God blesses them before he ever gives them a task. It's so important to recognize that order, right? The order is so important. He doesn't say, do this job and then you'll be blessed. He didn't say, subdue the earth, have dominion, be fruitful and multiply, and then the blessings will come. God blesses them and then sends them off on their callings, on their jobs, on their work. He blesses us so that we can do those jobs, those callings, that work that there is for us to do. And there is much for us to do. And what does it mean that God blessed them? What is a blessing, right? We use that word all the time. You could, people hashtag blessed all the time, right, about all sorts of things. The funniest to me is when people show a picture of their body, they're all buff or they're super athletic looking. Hashtag blessed, right? But what is a real blessing? I mean, that is a blessing in a way too. But what is a real blessing? Some commentators, some Hebrew scholars define blessing as an empowering. Right? God gives you the power, the ability to do that which we are called to do. Right? God never just says, do it and figure it out for yourself. Right? God says, I'm going to give you something to do, and I'm going to provide you the ways to do it, the giftings to do it, the resources to do it. Right? In fact, it's not on the screen, but right after verse 28, it tells us all about what God provided, all the food and the trees, and for everything that has breath, the breath of life, there's food for them. God provides. He blesses as he sends you off. And it's not only an empowering, it's not only a giving you an ability, but blessing is also a relational affirmation. That's so important, right? Blessing, if someone says, God has blessed me, there's a sense of we have a relationship, right? It's not some impersonal thing. It's not some cold just force of luck or something. It's a relational affirmation. When God blesses mankind, he's doing it as a personal God, a personal creator. We talked all about that last week, how personal our Maker is. And fast forward a couple thousand years, and even Jesus, when he embarked on his ministry, when he kicked it off and he was baptized, what's the word that comes from heaven? It's a relational affirmation. This is my son, with whom I am well pleased. God blesses you and then gives you a job to do. I think we all know this. I think we've lived long enough to know this. Working to get the blessing is exhausting. If you work so that you could be blessed by God, whether we're talking about your jobs, what you do in church, what you do with your family, if it's, I work so hard to be blessed, you will be exhausted eventually. Soon, I'd say. But if you work from the blessing that I have from God, then you actually work with a taste of paradise. We know we're not in paradise anymore. We're not in Eden anymore. But when you work from the blessing that God provides, you get an echo of Eden, a taste of the garden. Of course, in the same verse, right, we see here, it says, be fruitful and multiply. The same verse, it says, be fruitful and multiply. And of course, that could refer to procreation. Human beings had to multiply literally, right? But it can also very much refer to the work of our hands, the fruit of our labors. Also, we see in that same verse the word subdue. Subdue the earth. Fill the earth and subdue it. So what does that mean? A good way to think of it is master it. Master the earth. Study it. Understand it. Become an expert at it. It's like when Adam, we didn't read this passage today, but it is in Genesis chapter 2. When Adam, all the creatures, the living creatures are put before him by God, and he has to name them all. Right? That's the beginning of scientific study. It's the beginning of academic study in a very primary kind of way. So for all of you students here, please recognize your studies are not some necessary evil. I'll be the first to admit that's how I felt when I was in school, right? Whether we're talking, I think literally from the beginning of preschool all the way to the end of college, I felt like this is just a necessary evil. This is just to get a degree. This is just to get a job. But even the book of Genesis tells us our study of the world, our desire to subdue it and become an expert at it, to master it, is part of paradise. It's part of who we are as human beings, who we're created to be, what we're created to do, not just a necessary evil. And then the last thing we see is we're called to have dominion over the things of this earth, over all of creation as human beings. Quite simply, all I have to say about that one is we're called to rule over that which is created. We're called to rule over the things we study, the jobs we have, the things we make. And it's not supposed to rule over us. We're called to rule over them. So this is the general job that we see in Genesis 1:28, that God gives all of humanity. But what's the specific job that God gives the first man, Adam? Before we even turn there, what is the specific job given to Adam? What's his occupation? We see it in Genesis 2:15. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. To work it and work the garden and to watch over the garden. God doesn't make Adam and ask him to be a philosopher. God doesn't make Adam and ask him to be a pastor. God doesn't make him into a doctor or a lawyer. He makes him a gardener. Right? God makes the first man a gardener. I think this is important. It's an important reminder in our culture that perhaps for some of us, and definitely, whether we're talking about, even if we're not talking about individuals, when we talk about culture at large, we have turned work into a means of acquiring prestige. So often, haven't we? That so often we have turned work into a way to get status, work as a way to get admiration, work as a way to get rich. And that's not the vision that we see in Genesis 1 and 2. Our parents' generation, many of them, there's only two jobs they really wanted us to have, right? Doctor and lawyer. And I remember listening to an Asian American comedian who jokingly said, but it's true, he said, it's funny, our parents wanted us to be doctors and lawyers. They especially wanted us to be doctors so many times, but they never go to doctors. Right? They never go to them. So why do they want us to be one? It's for the prestige, right? It's not because they care about helping people. It's not because they care about, actually helping people who are sick. They just want the prestige. That's why they don't go to doctors. And of course, we could make fun of our parents, but is this not our whole culture? Whether we're talking about Asian culture, American culture, the world's culture. And at the end of the day, the question we have to ask ourselves is, does my work, no matter what you do, does my work glorify God? Does my job glorify God? And Genesis 1 and 2 will tell you, yes. Yeah, of course, as long as your work isn't illegal or immoral, the answer is yes. Whatever your job may be, no matter how much money you make, whether you make a lot, whether you make a little, whether you make nothing, because the work you do is in the household. Yes, when we work with the calling that God gives us, with the blessings and the giftings that he gives us, and we do it for him, yes, we can glorify God. One of the great fruits of the Protestant Reformation is how we were reminded in a very important way that also the way we glorify God with our jobs is not through some particular spiritual or religious occupations, right? We don't have to be a Christian plumber. Well, be a Christian and a plumber, right? But you don't have to be a Christian plumber. Right? You don't have to be a Christian doctor, right? Just be a Christian and a doctor, right? You don't have to have like Bible verses written everywhere. If you want to do that, that's fine, but you don't have to do that, right? You don't have to like say a blessing over everybody as you fix the sink, right? You just got to be a plumber and do it for the glory of God with the giftings that God has given you. Do it with a sense of honesty and excellence. Because I love what Martin Luther said, the German reformer. He reminded us, and of course many alongside him reminded us, it's not just the monks and the nuns and the priests who honor God with their jobs. And he said, princes, right? The royalty, the influencers, the big-time people, princes should rule because God has called them to do that specifically, and because God has called them to bless and serve their neighbor generally. In the same way, he said a tailor should make clothes because God has blessed them and called them to do that specifically, and he has also called them to serve and love their neighbor generally. They are both called by God, and they're both called to do it to serve the common good. In Colossians chapter 3, it says a very important thing about work. This is actually where a lot of people say they get the Christian or Protestant work ethic from. It says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. I think that whatever your job is, whatever you do Monday to Friday, let that sink in. You can do that job, and you should do that job for the Lord. We all know, if you even read the Bible just a little bit, that work, that not just work, but all of life, all of human existence fell, right? That it got tainted. So I know I'm saying all these things. I'm talking about all these ideals that we see in paradise, but once again, we know we're not in paradise. We know that we live in a world after the fall. We live in a world where people do evil things. Sometimes companies even do evil things. We live in a world where there's disease, there's disaster, there's sin. Not only other people's sin, but my sin. There's traffic. I firmly believe traffic is a clear pointer to the fact that we live in a fallen world. And some of you might be like, well, I don't have to deal with traffic anymore. I work from home. Well, there's another thing to discourage you, right? There's work from home fatigue, right? You even have to deal with traffic, but now you have to deal with WFH fatigue, right? And whatever other frustrations you might encounter, we are reminded, even through the frustrations, yes, work is good inherently. It is inherently a good thing. There was even work in paradise. So I shouldn't see it as just a necessary evil. I hate my job. I hate all my jobs. And yet at the same time, we recognize our jobs ain't going to fully do it for us either. There will always be frustration. There will always be toil, as we see later in the book of Genesis. And we're reminded that in the biggest way, perhaps, that work cannot be everything because there's also rest. There's rest. I love what Tim Keller once wrote. He wrote, since the fall of mankind, work is cursed, but it is not a curse. Right? Work is cursed, but it's not a curse. Therefore, to look for complete fulfillment or for little fulfillment or no fulfillment is missing the biblical vision for work. Yes, there should be fulfillment. There should. Because we're created to work. It's part of who we are. It's part of our DNA. It's part of our created order. And we're called to do what God has called us to do, specifically with the gifts and blessings He gives us. And we're called to do it to glorify Him, to work for Him, as well as serve our neighbor. But once again, we can't find our complete fulfillment in that. That's why we're called to let go of our work regularly. Every week, we're called to let go. It's called the weekend. In the Bible, it's called the Sabbath. And in the book of Genesis, God also shows us this. Even in paradise, we see the need for a healthy rhythm of work and rest. Get this, right? Even in paradise, there is still a need, a healthy rhythm of work and rest. On the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, right? It's an echo of what later becomes the Sabbath for God's people. And God rested from all his work. Let me ask you guys this. Why did God rest on the seventh day? Why did he do it? We all know this, right? If you know a little bit of theology, it's not because he was tired. Right? God doesn't get tired. Right? God, of all people, does not need to sleep or take a nap. Right? In fact, the Psalms tell us that he who watches over Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Why did God do it? Why did God rest on the seventh day? Just like Jesus said, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for Sabbath. God rested for us. He rested to show it to us, to model it for us. When he rested on the seventh day, God was saying, this is super important, guys. As fulfilling as work should be, as important as your jobs are here on this earth, once again, whether we're talking about going to the office or what you do in the home, as important as all of it is, you still need to rest and remember that there are more important things than your work. As important as your calling is, whatever your calling is currently in this life right now, be it in your jobs, in the home, in the church, whatever your calling is, there is still something more important than that. You know, there's some of us who hate work, right? There's some of us who treat work like, oh, it's a terrible thing. I hate that I have to go into the office every day, or I hate that I have to do my weekly commutes. For them, I would say, maybe you need to change your job then. Maybe. But if every time you change your job, you still hate your work, you still hate your job. I know some people like that, especially nowadays. People have gone through just so many different jobs. I once knew someone who I think went through like 7 jobs in 1 year. To them, I would say, you need to look back at Genesis 1 and 2. Remember that even work was part of paradise. But there are others, right? That's not everyone. There are others who maybe love work a little too much. Maybe all of your identity is founded in your work. Maybe all of your sense of your worth and your value comes from your work, comes from your job, comes from perhaps your paycheck even. And for those people, everything gets sacrificed. Right? Everything gets sacrificed at the altar of work. Your family, your worship of God, your health, be it your physical health or your mental health. And to them, I would say you need to remember that even rest was a part of paradise. Rest, healthy rhythms of work and rest was a part of the Garden of Eden. Even God, who doesn't get tired, rested. Even before there was ever a curse on work, we were called to rest. You know, Bill Gates, he was once asked whether or not he believes in God. And he responded by saying something that maybe wouldn't be surprising for Bill Gates to say. He said, religion is not very efficient. Religion is not efficient. Like when it comes to time allocation, all of that. There's a lot more I could be doing on a Sunday morning. That was his answer to Are You Religious? Religion is not efficient. It's not efficient. And you know what? He was right. Bill Gates was right. Religion is not meant to be efficient. The Sabbath, coming to church on Sundays, it's not meant to be efficient. God rested not for our efficiency. God rested to remind us you don't need to be efficient every single day of the week. You can actually take time to slow down, to pause, to let go even. To remember that there is a God who runs this universe. To remember that the work we do, as important as it is always in the shadow of the work God has done and is continuing to do in creating and sustaining the universe, in creating and sustaining our lives. Kevin DeYoung, he once wrote this: God gives us a Sabbath as a gift. It's an island of get to in a sea of have to. He also offers us Sabbath as a test. It's an opportunity to trust God's work more than our own. It is a gift. We need this gift. In the midst of all the daily grind, in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of all that you have to do. I'm sure every single person in this room feels like every week there is so much to do. Whether it's for your families, whether it's simply for the sake of the company, the job you work for, maybe you run a business, that's even more chaotic, I'm sure. And in the midst of all that, we need this gift, this island of I get to do this. I get to slow down. I get to let go. I get to stop looking at my phone and looking at the messages, looking at the emails. I get to do this because I know the God who runs this universe. Because I know that there is a God who, and my life is in his hands. My family is in his hands. My income is in his hands. But I like how he goes on to say, it's also a test. Can you let go? Can you let go of all the stress? I'll be the first to confess, it's real hard. It's very hard. And you know, it's a unique situation for pastors because we work on the Sabbath, right? But it's a test of, can I just say, God, I know you got my life. So for just one day, at least one day. I'm not saying it has to only be one day, right? We live in a 5-day work week. For some people, 4-day work weeks. Can I let go and lay it down at God's feet? And of course, if rest was part of the rhythms of healthiness in the Garden of Eden, how much more do we need rest in this world, in this fallen world, in this broken world? How much more do we need rest recognizing it's not paradise? And it's not Christians just recognizing this, right? I alluded to it just now. I mean, I know a lot of big companies are experimenting with things like unlimited vacation days, 4-day work weeks. And there's people who say there's pros and cons to all of those kinds of things. But I'm glad that, these major companies are being mindful of exhaustion and burnout in their workers. Let's be real, though, it's ultimately about the bottom line a lot of times. But I'm glad they care about these things. Everyone recognizes how important work is. And not only do we need this weekly rest that God modeled for us, but there was day and night, right, in creation. I do believe because there was the Sabbath rest even in paradise, I do believe there was even sleep in paradise. Because there was day and night. And at night, Adam and Eve slept. That's, the Bible doesn't make that super clear, so I have to be clear on that too. That's what I believe. That's my inclination. Because God modeled rest even on the seventh day, that there was even a regular daily rest. We need that. Once again, and that's all theory, right? Who knows if, I'm okay if there was no sleep in paradise. But for sure, we know we need sleep now here in this non-paradise fallen world. There's a prophet in the Old Testament by the name of Elijah. Elijah was a man of God, a righteous man. And yet he was really depressed at one point. And for good reason, because he was being persecuted by people in power. People wanted to kill him. He was exhausted because he was running hard for God, for the sake of God's glory and for his name. And he got depressed. He even said, I want to die. He literally said, I want to die. And it's important to recognize, what did God do for him in that moment? In that darkest, lowest moment for Elijah. Let's look, actually. This is in 1 Kings chapter 19. I know this is long. I'm not going to read all of it for us. But basically, I've underlined some important things. Once again, Elijah basically says to God, take away my life. Right? He literally asked to die. But then God sends an angel. And what does the angel do for him? Well, first of all, Elijah is allowed to sleep. He sits down at a tree and falls asleep. Angel comes, touches him, and he gives him a sermon. No, that's not what it says, right? The angel doesn't touch him and give him a sermon. The angel doesn't touch him and pray for him for 1 hour. The angel doesn't touch him and give him some pep talk, some inspirational speech, some, Instagram reel that's really powerful and moving. No, he what does he give him? He gives him food and water. He gives him food because he needs to eat and water because he needs to be hydrated. And then he lets him sleep again. And then he wakes him up again and he does it again. Food and water and sleep. Isn't that interesting? This is one of my favorite passages, especially ever since the pandemic. Just realizing we are all tired, we are all exhausted, we all need rest. And I think the church sometimes, I'm sure I've done this too, sometimes we go straight to the spiritual. And that's good. Spiritual is good. We need the spiritual. I'm going to talk about how we need the spiritual in a few moments. But before we get there, we have to remember we're human beings who need sleep, who need food, who need proper hydration. I'm so grateful for my wife. She taught me how to drink water. When I was young, I barely drank water, dude. And now I drink water all the time. My life is so much better for it. I'm hydrated now. I'm hydrated. I remember someone once telling me that a doctor told him that your sleep habits, even when you're young, affect you later when you're older. It has long-lasting effects. And that's why I'm probably so tired, because I barely slept when I was in my 20s. I had stayed up all night, all the time. And we're human beings. With Elijah, God calls him first to be a human being before he is a prophet of God. God calls him to be a healthy human being before he ever calls him to be someone who does hard work for God, as important as that is. Elijah, he had to rest, he had to sleep, he had to eat, he had to recover so that he could go on his journey, what he was called to do. His physical health, but I would say here what we see more importantly than his physical health even is his mental health. His mental health took greater priority than just chugging along, doing his ministry as a prophet of God. Let me tell you, brothers and sisters, this is so important. There's so much going on. I'm not going to get into details, but there's so much going on around us. Not necessarily at our church or CCSC, but we have different things happening in churches around us, some closer, some further, where important is not even proper. It's an understatement. We're getting some severe reminders how much we have to protect our health, especially our mental health. And this isn't just something we see in the news. This is something we see in the Bible. This is something we see in 1 Kings. This is something we see all the way back in creation when God implemented the Sabbath rest. You think that was only for your physical health? It's all connected anyway. We know this. Our physical health, our mental health, our spiritual health, our emotional health. And we have to remember, God never calls you to do your work at the expense of your well-being. Never. He never calls you to do your job at the expense of your family's well-being. He never calls you to do ministry, stuff for him and his church and his people at the expense of your well-being or your family's well-being. This is a little silly that I'm even sharing this, but I was talking with a couple pastors. This is many months ago. They're not really part of our circles. They're not at churches that we're really related to, but they're dear brothers. I know they love me and I love them, but we got in a little tiff. Pastors get in little tiffs with each other sometimes. We didn't fight. We didn't fist fight or anything, but we got in a little tiff. You know why? They said something to me that just disturbed me. They said, "You can't take a vacation in your first year at Kindred." Because I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to take a vacation in June." It's a short little vacation, not even a whole week. You can't take a vacation in your first year as a church planting pastor? And now, once again, we're good now. We love each other. We love each other. But I was just like, why not? Why can't I? Like, it's not like I want to shirk my duties or I want to, like go on vacations every week or something. Just this one vacation in June. Why does that bother you? Like, I don't think a single member of Kindred would have a problem with that. I would hope they don't, and I don't think they would. Why wouldn't my church body want me to take some breaks for the sake of my health, my mental health, my emotional health, my physical health, for the sake of my family's health, for the sake of our time together? Why wouldn't they want that? Why wouldn't I want that? Regardless of what other people want, why wouldn't I want that? And more importantly, perhaps, why wouldn't I want to model that as a pastor for my people? Why wouldn't I want to model? You could take breaks. You need to take breaks. Whether we're talking about vacation or just a good use of your weekends, good use of your nights, we all need to rest. Whether we're talking about your jobs or all the serving you do at church, we all need it. We all need to do this healthy, not successful, not efficient, not a great production, but healthy. We need to be a church and a people who are healthy. That's what matters. That's what God wants. And I know God wants that because of places like 1 Kings 19, but also because of Genesis 1 and 2, when we see that rest is even part of paradise. All right, that's my little soapbox for us. Once again, we see this modeled for us, even at the start of the creation of the universe. And for Elijah, God sends an angel to do this for him, right? He sends an angel who says, he's kind of like, go to sleep and I'll be your alarm clock and I'll give you what you need. I'll help you get what you need, the food you need, the drink you need, just the comfort you need. And, maybe one day God will send you a literal angel, but we know for a fact that God sends like lowercase a angels into our lives. Right, lowercase a. I'm not trying to start some weird theology or something. I'm talking just about people, right? Lowercase a angel, in case you're confused. God sends so many people in our lives, and sometimes the best way to get rest, real rest, is to lean in to your community, to lean in to the people that love you and care for you and are praying for you, who aren't going to judge you, who aren't going to shun you, but who are going to help you to get what you need. Whether it's something as basic as sleep and drink and food, or perhaps something more. I witnessed 2 separate conversations where the conclusion was, man, in the midst of all the horrific things that are happening in the world, all the hardships of life, sickness, death, just whatever, man, what would people do if they didn't have community? What do people do who don't have community? And we were talking about, man, that is just so hard. That's so tragic when people are going through just the inevitable struggles of life and they don't have community. But you know what occurred to us? That is a tragedy, first of all. Like, that's horrible if you're struggling and you feel like you have no one you could go to, no one you could talk to. But you know what's a greater tragedy? It's when people who do have community, who are surrounded by community, who are surrounded by angels, and they're struggling, but whether it's mentally or just circumstantially, and they still don't go to their community. They don't ask for help. I would say that's the greater tragedy. It's right there. The community is right there. Your angels are all around you, but you're not taking their help. May we not live out that tragedy as we seek to be healthy, as we seek to rest, truly rest. May we be a people who know there are so many angels around us. And of course, I recognize the church, throughout the history of the church, has done things because of certain taboos or certain things you feel like you can't talk about, certain things you can't bring up. Sometimes the church makes it hard to ask for help. But I want to encourage you, please see the angels around you. I'm not saying you got to talk to everybody about all your problems, but find the angels. Find the angels. There are angels around you. Lowercase a, of course. as well as uppercase A angels. You may not see them moving and working, but they are, and sometimes through the people who know you and love you. How we need rest. And you know what? Jesus knew this too. I love how Deacon John opened our worship service today. If you missed the call to worship, you missed out, guys. The call to worship, Deacon John gave it to us, where Jesus says, he doesn't just say, I'll give you a good night's sleep, right? He doesn't just say, I'll give you a good weekend, I'll give you a good vacation. He says, come to me and I will give you rest for your souls. Jesus tells you he will give you a rest that no 4-day work week, no amount of unlimited vacation could ever give you. He says, I will give you rest for your souls. You know, last week I mentioned the movie Chariots of Fire, and more importantly, the real-life person, Eric Liddell, who is the protagonist of that story. And you guys remember probably that quote, when I run, I feel the pleasure of God. But you know, Eric Liddell had a competitor by the name of Harold Abrahams. And he had a quote too. Here's his quote. He's talking about the upcoming race. Now in 1 hour's time, I will be out there again. I will raise my eyes and look down that corridor 4 feet wide. Get this. With 10 lonely seconds to justify my whole existence. Wow. Right? This race is 10 lonely seconds to justify my whole existence. And then he concludes, but will I? Right? Will I justify my whole existence? Kind of remind, I'm not into running, but I do like Rocky. It reminds me of Rocky, the first Rocky movie, the only good one, where he says he's about to fight the champion Apollo Creed, and he's really nervous and stressed out, and he shares with his girlfriend. He says, I just want to prove that I'm not a bum. That's why I'm going to fight this guy in the boxing ring. Simply to prove that I'm not a bum. And as much as I love Rocky, and as much as he is a fictional character, I lament if that is how you operate in your work. If you operate like Harold Abrahams or Rocky Balboa. I want to justify my existence. I want to prove that I'm not a bum. Eric Liddell, when it comes to Harold Abrahams, his competitor, I don't know if he was a Christian or not, but we know for a fact Eric Liddell was. And I pray and ask that the Lord would give all of you, not that exhausting mentality of I need to justify my existence, but that life-giving mentality of I do this with the pleasure of God. I do this with the blessings that he gave me first. He's already given me Christ himself, who gives me rest for my soul. And that's why I can do my work. That's why I can go get on my commute on Monday morning. You know what Jesus said on the cross, right? He said, it is finished. The work of righteousness, the work of obedience to God, the work of all the laws and all the requirements, all the burden of what it means to live under a holy and righteous and just God. Jesus finished it all in his righteousness, in his work, and he even paid it all, as we're about to sing, on that cross, the punishments for our sin. And when we do our work now, we can do it in the shadow of the finished work of the cross. That's how we get rest for our souls. Because we know our jobs can't save us. Our jobs can't cleanse us. No matter how much we try, no matter how much we say, I'm going to try to justify my existence, it never can. It's good that Harold Abraham said, will I? Will it? Because it won't. It can't. Even no amount of work you do for God, no amount of work you do for the church, no amount of work you do for the mission can ever cleanse you or save you. Only the finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross. And it's such a big deal that it would actually even change the day on which God's people rest. You guys notice that, right? What do we see in Genesis 1 and 2? Or rather, Genesis 2. It's the seventh day that we rest, the seventh day of the week. But you might be thinking, how can we go to church on the first day of the week now? And we see that the coming of Christ changed things up. In Acts 20, verse 7, we see Now that Christ has come, preaching and fellowship happen on the first day of the week. Right? They're gathered and they break bread. Paul gives a sermon. He actually preaches so long and so late that somebody falls asleep and falls out of a window, right? Maybe you feel like that right now. In 1 Corinthians 16:2, we see the receiving of offering on the first day of the week, suddenly. Why? And we see it right there. It's because the resurrection of Jesus Christ also happened on the first day of the week. That emphasis is there for a reason. Not just that underline, but I'm saying, why does it matter that it was the first day of the week? Because we're reminded every time on all three of those verses, that's how important Jesus' life, death, and resurrection was, that it changed up even the day of rest. Only something as significant as the coming of Jesus Christ can do something like that. Because the coming of Jesus Christ gives us a greater rest than anything else ever could. Truly rest for your souls. You know, the Israelites, they looked forward, right? They were always looking forward to the coming of the Messiah, to the coming of the Savior, the deliverer, the one who was prophesied about. So they always looked forward. They always looked forward to the last day, right? They always looked forward to the last day. But now, as people who have received Jesus Christ, who now have already seen that he has come and all that he has done, his life, death, resurrection, now we get to look back. We get to look back. As the author of Hebrews says, when we put trust and hope in Christ, we have now entered into that rest. We have entered it. It's not fully complete, but we have entered it. And so now we get to look back. We get to start our week with the special rest. And throughout the week, we get to look back at what Christ has done and who he is for us and the rest that he offers. As we do the important work that we all do to glorify God and to serve our neighbors. And my kindred brothers and sisters, I do pray that as we all work well, may we all work well for the glory of God. But perhaps even more importantly, I pray that we rest well. That we rest fully, truly. And let's be a people who protect that rest. Let's be a people who protect and ask for help when we need it. As we truly rest in our daily lives, even with something as simple and basic as sleep or the weekend or your vacation, but most importantly, the rest we find in the preaching and reminding and resting in the gospel. That Jesus Christ said, "It is finished," and you now have rest for your souls. Please join me in a word of prayer. Lord, I ask that as much as we want to be good workers in all that we do, Monday through Friday, and for the church too, and for the mission, as much as we want that, as much as we want to give of our blood, sweat, and tears to very worthy things, oh Lord, may it never be at the expense of our well-being, at the expense of our health. Lord, I pray for every single person in this chapel today that you would guard us, that you would remind us of all the angels around us, that you would give us the help that we need, as simple as sleep and food, as much as good counseling, good brothers, good sisters surrounding us, encouraging us, weeping with us, praying for us. Lord, I pray that you would make us more and more healthy. Oh, Lord, help us to forget about success or how things look. Lord, help us to be healthy. That's what we ask. And would you grant us rest for that end? Brothers and sisters, would you just take a few moments to come before God in silent prayer? Just ask him for the help that you need. Think about your work. Think about your rest. Lay all of that at his feet at this time.